that some clarity or some understanding or some unlocking or this iron moving will happen in the connection. It doesn't happen like you've got a plan, I'm going to do this. It's not like I learned structural family therapy. It's not quite like that. It is, okay, I'm going to be there. I'm going to try to be here with you. I'm going to share a few poems that I don't quite understand, but are pointing in a certain direction, and I need your help also as you listen with me about this. So my dilemma in preparing this talk is also our patient's dilemma in knowing what to do in therapy and why am I here and what is trying to unlock. Okay? So I'm going to start and give you the first part of a poem by Stanley Kunitz, who was our poet laureate at about 2001. He lived to about 100 years old. I think he recently died. I want to give you the first part now. In which kind of the horror of going into yourself sometimes. He's going to start from that place, and then as he goes down, and literally he's going to go down, he's going to drop into a well. As he goes down, he's going to suddenly fly out of there. He's going to make a spiritual move to get out of there. Psychotherapy, in the tradition I work in, does not make that move to suddenly fly out of there. The real work is, as you hear the beginning of the poem, who is this who's descending into the well? And what is your job as a therapist? Because the patient would love to fly out of there. In fact, he would also like to kill the one who is tortured and going down because it's ruining their life. That's what they think. So we've got medication. I'm not against medication, but sometimes the quick search for a medication is also to fly out of this well. Sometimes there's no other way out, and it's a matter of survival. Okay, so watch the descent and watch his get out of there pretty fast. It's called What of the Night, and this is very good because what we're talking about is the night. The night. One summer, like a stone dropped down a well, I sank into myself and raked the bottom slime. When I stretched out my thigh, it touched the dark. And the dark rolled over me. A brackish life filled the cups of my skin. Then, gradually, I heard above the steady breathing of the land a high inhuman chord light years away out of a cleaner space, a more innocent age, as when pilot angels with crystal eyes and streaming hair rode planets through the skies, and each one sang a single ravishing note that melted into the music of the spheres. He got out. Okay. The challenge of psychotherapy is how to stay. And this is not easy. Here's a note from a patient after a long therapy. I entered a house for the criminally insane. Body and soul contracted, contorted, near death. I am nothing, I screamed. You are everything, a green vest replied. The green vest refers to me. When I treated her, I wore a green vest. You are everything, a green vest replied. Sticky tar oozing out of a cavity where a heart should have been. So cold, so alone, so empty. Let me die, I implored. Darkness is where we begin, the green vest insisted. Wow, it's touching to hear that again. Let me die. Darkness is where we begin. What of the night? And all through the theme of this talk is what is asked of us. I'm not going to try to lay out a lot of dynamics of different cases. I'll tell you one or two. But my question is, what do you need to do this? So, someone is descending into that well in that poet. But who is that? Who is the one who is alive in that tortured darkness? The theme of alive and death. The paradox is that sometimes what feels to be most dead is what is screaming out of an aliveness, trying to say, I'm dead! But that's an alive scream. So, when I search for the aliveness in my patient and the horror starts, I'm interested in who's screaming. And what are they screaming about? Another way of saying that, in a way, we are all multiple personalities. And when I sit in front of a patient, I'm asking myself, who of them is the one who needs the therapy? Because the one who got themselves there in the car or the bus, and they got themselves there and is going to pay my fee or whatever, is not the one probably who needs the therapy. Who is that? We've got a descent into a well. We've got a patient saying, let me die. There's only tar here. Now, how does a therapist know who the patient is that needs the therapy? Another way of saying that is when you open yourself to a relationship with a client, you're asking, trying to feel out who is trying to presence here in our relationship. Who is trying to contact me? Of the different selves, who seems to need me? Who wants me? And the way I tend to know that is, as I said in the last lecture, I'm listening in my body for some kind of impact of a certain word, of a certain image. That is to say, you're listening, I'm hearing everything, but not every word or sentence is hitting here. The words and sentences that hit here, like, it may be a simple sentence. I've been so alone lately. And for some reason, that hits you. When that hits me, I am in the presence of something from the patient, the alone one, trying to presence and enter our relationship and to reach me. And I may, since one of Jung's great discoveries, and I'm not speaking only from the Jungian tradition here, but one of Jung's great discoveries was when something is tormenting you in a feeling, that if you can find the image of the feeling, you have taken a very important step. For him, as he went through his crisis, it relieved a lot of the fears of insanity, and it allowed him to work with it. And so, if the word alone is what hits me, I might say, just close your eyes a second. Can you see that alone one? Do you see anybody who just said that? And see if I can, again, ask, who is trying to presence toward me? And that may be very scary to the person. Let me give you an example of that. Here's a woman in her early 50s who's been quite depressed for a long time. So here's what's starting to presence toward me. I'm quoting her, I feel like this really dead weight on people. And the voices say, kill yourself. You're a piece of shit. That part of me infects others with venom. She's just dead. I hate her. She's like a psychic vampire. And she'll affect you, me. She'll affect you. She'll infect you like she affects me. The way she grew up, she's supposed to handle all this by herself. She's not, I mean, she's supposed to manage all this by herself. Another reason she can't tell me all of this is because I'm a psychiatrist. I might commit her. This is crazy. So we have to go through that. Am I going to commit her? And of course not. So when we are trying to find the emotional truth in an hour of what is the key emotion that is trying to be expressed in that hour, and who is trying to express that toward the therapist? So I said, close your eyes and look. Let's see if we can see this one. She says, I see an infant locked in sort of like a space capsule. She's ghostly. She's horrible. Her head is hugely enlarged. She's toxic. She's like a leper. She's living in her vomit. And she has a huge deformed head. Kunitz, dropping into the well. She extends a hand to me, the patient says, this deformed infant in the space capsule. She extends a hand to me. It's awful. I don't want to touch her. She's trying to do that all alone. She needs oxygen. I said, why don't you have a fantasy of our doing this together, knowing that her way is to do this all alone, and how horrible this is. Why don't you have a fantasy of our doing this together? So she puts me near her in the fantasy. She reaches in, pulls her out, and I'm just standing nearby in the image. Wraps her in leaves. She comes from the Indian tradition and has a whole thing about great-grandparents in Tennessee and the Indian tribes, healing grandparents, and the soil and leaves. Wraps the infant in leaves. A few sessions later, she tells me she's had a fantasy of a shepherd being of help to that child, and that she considers me the shepherd. So she brings a piece of cloth to that session. She says, this is the shepherd's cloth. I give her a blanket. She wraps a blanket around herself. She admits, this is all too much. I need help. I can't do this by myself. That is a real breakthrough. I need help. I can't do this by myself. And has a fantasy that the shepherd is holding now the baby. I'm holding the baby. In the last lecture I gave, I was quoting Winnicott saying, the patient in a long-term therapy like this has to hand the child to the analyst. I'm holding that child, and she sees a 5-year-old who looks at horror at this child. I'm holding the child. The 5-year-old looks horrified, and an adolescent girl appears, herself as an adolescent. And she says about this adolescent, she trusts the shepherd. And the baby looks okay. Baby is just red-faced. But she realizes, this adolescent, she can't help the baby. And somehow this adolescent girl is connected to the forest realm. Okay, so she's beginning to admit that she needs help, turning it over. And while part of her is still looking horrified at this, another part has just presenced, called the adolescent, who says, you're okay. and the baby looks somewhat normal, and this can proceed. Okay, so I asked you who needs the therapy. Sometimes things present that are terribly awful for the patient to allow. In this case, this girl in the space capsule, this infant. So I'm always asking, and I'm asking you as therapists, who in your patients is trying to find you? Who is trying to impact you? So here's kind of the situation again. Here's you. Here's your client. You're in some kind of relational field. If this field of relationship is working, something in the client that lives in sort of a cul-de-sac, something in the client that lives off somewhere, like Kunitz going down in the well, like the space girl in the capsule. If this relationship is working well, something in the client is going to give a signal to the therapist that it's there. And sometimes the therapist gets the signal even before the client does. What's in there, that's walled off, this is often, you can imagine, this person that I've told you about who's a professional person and married and trying to raise 2 kids, this depressed infant in the space capsule is very walled off. And when it tries to surface into a therapy, it's up against a lot. The patient does not want this to come out. She says, let's kill it. So we've got in front of this wall, we've got something called the guardian that's usually thought of as the patient's resistance to the emergence of what is trying to get to a relationship with a therapist for some healing. We've got a guardian that has learned all its life, do it alone, don't let this shit out, do not do that. In fact, if this thing starts to surface, usually there's someone with a lot of anxiety that the guardian is trying to protect. So this thing is trying to surface, and it wants the therapist. Let me give you an example, another key example that's been very dramatic in a way. Another professional woman comes to me, married, 2 kids, somebody else, and she has a history of childhood abuse, both physical and sexual. And she has built what she considers a fairly good life. She's married, raising 2 kids, has a career, and yet, in fact, the insurance company, when they tried to deny this continued therapy, said, well, she has a career, she's working, and she's married, and she's raising her family. We want you to terminate this therapy. I am so proud of myself. There is an agency in the state that you can ask to review the insurance company's decision. Now, I wrote them like about a 12-page letter on this therapy, and they reversed the whole decision. Anyway, that's such craziness. So she has this life over here, her house, her kids, her career. She says, you know, it's not right. Something isn't right. For one thing, what happened to me as a kid is it's like they're on flashcards. And every day I review them. I look at these memories. I go over them. And this is distracting to me. And my life, I feel I'm not quite there in the marriage, and I'm not quite there with my 2 young children. There's a distance there that I think is related to the trauma and to my flashcard. So we started the therapy on that basis. And one day she came and she said, let me give you an image here. It's as if the part of me that went through all this is a young girl, and while I have this house over here and this life over here, she lives over here in a field. And she has no house. She lives in a field, and I think she's taking care of a baby out there. And she looks at my life over here and doesn't think much of it. Okay. Maybe within a few weeks after she told me that, I'm doing an ordinary session with her. All of a sudden, her voice changes. And this 14-year-old girl is talking to me. Now, I mean, she sits differently. We gave her a different name. And she says that she holds a lot of the memories of what went on. And she just pushed the patient out of the way. She pushed my patient out of the way and was sitting there saying, I was looking forward to contact with you. It's like she got the therapist that she never had a chance to have at that age. Now, while that can be classified in a certain way in the DSM, I'm telling you this story to illustrate the point of something in your patient that even when it's not that dramatic of pushing your patient's usual consciousness off to the side and saying, here I am, that just like in a dream, these figures can come forward. There is something in your client that needs you, that very much needs you, and will make an effort to find you. That's what I want you to hear in this story. It made a powerful effort to come into connection with me. And all of a sudden, I had 2 patients now. And we talked about, okay, can we let the 14-year-old come? Yes, and we're working that way. And a lot of discussion about that. But that's the main point. This, for you to sense who it is that needs contact with you and to not get too scared about that and to let that connection happen is what, as I said, is walled off protectively. The guardians of this patient had built a whole life over here. But this one wanted to make contact. You all with me with this? All right. Now here's the patient's dilemma. The person's psychological survival comes to depend on keeping these forces out, keeping these forces away. And the person, here's our patient, is very much dependent on this whole cluster, I guess you could call it their ego or their personality. That is, they have their guardians, the defenses. They have sources of anxiety that the defenses try to handle. And here's them just trying to live their life. The person is very much dependent on their usual personality to get them through. It has got them all the way to you. It's done a lot. But we've got these walled-away figures, Kunitz descending into the well, into that slime, this girl in the space capsule, this 14-year-old who's got a lot of memories of what happened, trying to push into the therapy. And the real issue for the patient is, can she be less dependent on their usual defenses and get more dependent on the therapist? Because this part is trying to get dependent on you. This part wants a relationship with you. And the client is in a real dilemma. Can I let this go a bit? That would keep protecting and keep walling this out. Can I let this go a bit to let this connection between what's walled away in there and the therapist? Can I do that? Can I let myself get that connected with a therapist? Which is usually experienced as, oh, I'm finding myself getting dependent on you. And that in our culture has a bad word. It's a bad word to them for themselves. When the client I just told you about with the 14-year-old was first with me and she began to feel her connection with me, she said, I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing. You're trying to trick me. You want me to get close to you. Then I'll be in your control. So we had to move through that. It's called the negative transference. Okay. So the interesting thing about what's been walled away here and what they're so afraid of, the girl in the space capsule who's so tortured, the grotesque head, the 14-year-old, and Kunitz's descent in the well, the interesting thing I found is that although these things come with this horror often, they come with a great deal of aliveness to it. Well, you know, you heard my scream. They come with a great deal of aliveness. And the fear of what will happen to them if this comes out actually is a fear of life. That's where the life is, in that scream. That's where the life is. This can sometimes work for a while, this usual personality. But that's not where the life is. They wouldn't be coming to you if that's where the life was. That's where the adjustment is. That's where they're all functioning in. That's why the insurance company could say, fine, look, fine, she's functioning. That's a living death. So let's go back to the life in the death. The life in the death. Here's Emily Dickinson. What I'm saying, the life in the death is you being able to, is the client getting to the point where they can express that horror and that you are open to receiving it. And it lands on you, and you form a relationship. That's the life in the death. So Dickinson, in trying to reach us with this, I felt a funeral in my brain, and mourners to and fro kept treading, till it seemed that sense was breaking through. And when they all were seated, a service, like a drum, kept beating, till I thought my mind was going numb. And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my soul with those same boots of lead again. Then space began to toll as all the heavens were a bell, and being but an ear, and I, and silence, some strange race, wrecked, solitary, here. And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down, and hit a world at every plunge, and finished knowing then. Okay. Now I'm going to need your help on a poem about this. There's a funeral going on. We again have the descent down. This appeared in the New Yorker a couple months ago. It's a poem by C.K. Williams, and it's called The Coffin Store. All right, so Dickinson says there's a funeral going on. I hear the box. As a therapist, I'm interested. Who's dying? What's going on? Can that connect with me? So this poem is going to start with, I'm dead. I'm dead. This is the living death we're talking about. When so much life has had to be walled out because it's been too horrible to bear, then you're in this death and you're in the coffin. You're walking around like you're alive, but you know something really wrong is going on here. You're not fully alive. That's where the poem starts. So he's wondering about this living death. And death gives him a present, gives him a coffin with a sliding door, so that potentially he can see out. But then the door jams. So that's going to be what's going to happen then. And all of a sudden, when the door jams on your coffin and you can't really see out and you're really in there, I heard a funeral in my brain, Dickinson says. Kunitz is dropping down. When the door jams, he hears a voice. And I need your help. What is this voice? He hears a feminine voice, whose name is Catherine, saying, Mon amour, mon amour. What is this voice? So I'll give you the whole poem the first time. The Coffin Store. I was lugging my death from Kampala to Krakow. From Africa to Poland, from Uganda, I guess, to Poland. I was lugging my death from Kampala to Krakow. Death, what a ridiculous load you can be, like the world a tremble on Atlas's shoulders. In Kampala, I wondered why the people, so poor, didn't just kill me. Why don't they kill me? In Krakow, I must have fancied I'd find poets to talk to. I still believed then I'd domesticated my death. That's good. That's this living death we're talking about. I still believe then I domesticated my death, that he'd no longer gnaw off my fingers and ears. We even had parties together. Happy, said Death. Happy, said Death, and gave me my present, a coffin. My coffin, made in Kampala with a sliding door in its lid to look through at the sky, at the birds, at Kampala. That was his way, I soon understood, of reverting to talon and snarl, for the door refused to come open. No sky, no bird, no poets, no Krakow. You'd think they'd probably enter therapy then, maybe. Catherine came to me then. Open your eyes, mon amour. But death had undone me. My knuckles were raw as an ape's, my mind slid like a sad-ankled skate, and no matter what Catherine was saying, was sighing, was singing, mon amour, the door stayed shut, oh, shut. I heard trees being felled, skinned, smooth, hammered together as coffins. I heard death snorting and stamping, impatient to be hauled off away. But here again was Catherine, sighing and singing, and the tiny carved wooden door slid ajar. Just enough. The sky, one single bird, Catherine, just enough. So who's Catherine? Who is Catherine? What is Catherine? Anybody have a feeling for that in the poem?
I have a feeling for what it would mean to me.
What would it mean to you?
For me, Catherine could be any number of consciousness, whether it's an internal higher self or one that's come to rescue. It could be an external source, a spiritual source that's come. But I wouldn't probably try to figure it out. I would probably ask her to dialogue with it, to nod on her hand, write with it, to voice dialogue with it, to find out for herself who this is. That's
Very
how I
good.
would do it.
Thank you. And to step into relationship with this, that
Have her step into relationship with it.
her being the client,
Writer,
the writer.
Have her step into relationship with it and give it voice.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no conjecture figuring it out. It will tell her.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope.
I would hope.
I would say that it's that spiritual, that scientific, unexplained will to live, which may be personified in love. But it's when we're in the coffin or in the depths of the well, what is it that brings us out?
Yeah.
We get to that point where we think we want to die, and yet something is there to push us onward.
Mm-hmm.
It's that unexplained will to live.
Yes. The will to live, the unexplained will to live when we're in the coffin and shut. Sometimes I go to two poles with this, and I appreciate both of what you've just said. Sometimes I think of Catherine as this walled away part that's trying to contact the therapist, trying to say, I'm here. And sometimes I think of it's me, that we as therapists sometimes, when things get so dark, have to be that voice calling out of our own connection to say, yes, you're in this death place, but I'm here. When I said to my client who's looking at the grotesque infant in the space capsule, have a fantasy of me being with you right then. Sometimes I think, am I Catherine then? Am I saying, I'm here? You don't have to be so alone in this horror. Sometimes I think that we have to reach out and say, I'm connected with you. And as two people just said, there are other forces here when things get that dark that may attempt to come in.
I think of her statement, mon amour,
Yes.
my love.
My love.
Maybe she is my love. So what I love, what if I can connect with what I love, that might help slide that door.
Aha, thank you. She is my love, what I love. It's coming through in a foreign language. And you know what especially moves me to? The tiny carved wooden door slid ajar, just enough. The sky, one bird, not a flock of birds. If there can be that connection, if anything can come in, I'll just mention to you briefly the penultimate scene in Thornton Wilder's Our Town. We've watched through 2 acts the growth and development of Emily and 2 families in a small Connecticut town. And in the 3rd act, Emily, who has grown up, has died in childbirth and sits in the graveyard with other people from the town who have died. And her husband comes, and what's left of her family, and all the people sitting like you're sitting. That's how it is on stage. You're all in the graveyard. And they're talking to one another, and Emily just arrived and takes her seat. And she says, I heard it's possible to go back. Say, well, yeah, but you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. We're moving on. And you don't understand what it would be like to go back. She said, but I understand I can go back for one day. This is one of the great plays. The stage manager, Thornton Wilder himself probably, who's been narrating this whole play, says, you're right, you can go back for one day. Would you want to do that? She says, yes. So she picks her 12th birthday. I want to go back for my 12th birthday. Just fine. It's now October 17th, 1872. And she walks on stage, and we're back in the scenes, the 2 families, and her father's been on a trip, and he comes back. Where's my birthday girl? The father says. Where's my birthday girl? And Emily is standing there. Now, she has made the descent into death. She knows she's dead, but she's there again. It's like, do you remember that? The great scene in A Christmas Carol is when the ghost of Christmas Past takes Scrooge back, and he's got to witness again what he once lived. That begins the reclamation of his life. So Emily sees her father and her mother and the birthday preparations, but her eyes are transformed. She's not like Emily at 12 years old. She is someone who has died and come back and now sees an ordinary day, the sky, one bird, her mother, her father, and she begins this, it becomes so overwhelming to her when that door in the coffin slides open. It is so overwhelming. You see, you're all sitting here in just an ordinary setting. It's not overwhelming anymore. It all has faded into the light of common day, Wordsworth has told us. It began with something overwhelming as a child. But Shelley told us that a film of familiarity now goes over everything. And it's just, I'm here, I'm sitting in a chair, I've got my life. It's certainly not overwhelming. But for Emily it is, and for us it is, sitting in that audience. How Wilder did this is a miracle. And all of a sudden, we see through Emily's eyes, and she begins like looking at, oh, my picket fence, oh, the beech nut tree, and then she says, I can't take this. I can't stand this. I've got to go back. You mean this was going on all the time? This was going on all the time? I can't. When that coffin door slides open, I can't. And then she begins this magnificent goodbye. Goodbye waking up, and goodbye going to sleep and waking up. Oh my God. I feel so emotional just saying those words again. The preciousness of one bird, the sky, and Catherine as she begins to say goodbye to what we're living every day. Now, I don't think I bring my clients to the state of, oh my God, I'm alive. But I'll tell you, I'll conclude this with a challenge, a couple of challenges. First, of what we have to do. There's a poet I really love, I think he's still alive, Jack Gilbert. His wife, who's a Japanese woman, died of cancer, and he was very close to her. And he wrote this small little poem about her dying and about where he was in relationship to her dying as she was in the hospital connected to all the machinery, and he's sitting there. Now, I just want to say this. This is a very tender poem, and I hope Jack Gilbert will forgive me when, after I read it, that I want to apply what he's struggling with here to what I've been talking about today, and I hope for his forgiveness. It's called By Small and Small, Midnight to 4 a.m. For 11 years, I have regretted it. For 11 years, I have regretted it. Regretted that I did not do what I wanted to do as I sat there those 4 hours watching her die. I wanted to crawl in among the machinery. I wanted to crawl in among the machinery and hold her in my arms, knowing the elementary, leftover bit of her mind would dimly recognize it was me carrying her to where she was going. Okay, that's Jack. We have clients with a lot of machinery around them. Their defenses, their anxieties, their usual personality, all the machinery of their life. To crawl in there among the machinery and say, mon amour, to be able to do that allows something to happen to a life. To crawl in among the machinery and say, I'm connected to you and you guys who've protected her all these years, and something in here that you think is horrible but is screaming with life. I'm willing to crawl in among that machinery. It asks a lot of us. But when you hear the messenger, when you hear something, it's good if you can respond. I'll conclude this then about responding to the messenger with the second part of Kunitz's poem that began with his descent into the well and then his spiritual ascent out. This is not an easy second part to understand, but here it is. And I think it belongs here in this poem. He grafted these two parts together to remind you he went down into the horror. I sank into myself and raked the bottom slime. Here's the second part. What wakes me now like the country doctor startled in his sleep? What wakes me now? You see, he hasn't handled this. So the messenger or the mon amour, something still wants him. What wakes me now? Like the country doctor startled in his sleep, why does my racing heart shuffle down the hall for the 100th time to answer the night bell? Whoever summons me has need of me. Whoever summons me, whoever summons you, whoever's trying to presence in this therapy and find you, like that 14-year-old who pushed the client out of the way and said, I want you. Whoever summons me has need of me. How could I afford to disobey that call? A gentle, insistent ring, that was the night bell, pulled me from my bed, from loving arms. He's in bed in loving arms. He hears the call. It's the 100th time he shuffled down the hall. A gentle, insistent ring pulled me from my bed, from loving arms, though I know I am not ready yet. Now here's the dilemma again. Though I know I'm not ready yet, and nobody stands on the stoop, not even a stray cat slouches under the sodium lamp. Deceived or self-deceived, I can never atone for it. Oh, I should be the one to swell the night with my alarm. I should be the one to swell the night with my alarm. Okay. When the messenger comes again, I shall pretend in a childish voice, my father is not at home. It's often too much when the messenger comes to know what to do. We open the door, we see nothing. And maybe the nothing is what the therapist would start with. Let's start with the nothing. You open the door and there's nothing. What is the nothing in your life? But it's often too much. I can never atone for it, but he's right. I should be the one to swell the night with my alarm. And that alarm is what you are going to hear. Hopefully. Because he's not the father yet. He can't do it yet. He needs us, and we need each other, and we need to, as you said, to connect when the messenger comes. All right, so let me see if I have any last sentence to say to you. The subtitle of this lecture is What is Asked of the Therapist in This Situation. To sometimes be Catherine and say, Mon amour, I'm with you. To sometimes hear Catherine and to know that some messenger is trying to reach you, vitally trying to reach you, and that we're willing to crawl into the machinery that's merely keeping them alive, but a death is going on too for some of our patients, a living death. So that's what I think. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll take a few questions. And Craig, what time should we stop today?
Oh, you have at least 10 minutes.
At least 10 minutes. So those of you who have to leave, please. And I'll take any questions, any comments, anything, especially anything you were moved by, because I never fully know what I'm saying until I hear something back and I say, oh, that's the point I was trying to make.
I was interested in your starting this lecture with the anxiety that you felt in doing this lecture. I wondered what was being walled off. You know, what part of the therapist gets walled off in this process and gets brought into the process. I think sometimes there's the connection from
this walled-off part of the patient with a walled-off part of the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And we feel this anxiety, we feel this, maybe this deadness, or our defenses coming up. And there's a connection on the life of the therapist that's been sort of walled off in this little connection area there.
You ever thought about that?
Yeah, I was thinking about the same thing in terms of you said, what is being asked of us as therapists?
Yeah.
In terms of being able to welcome the screams from the patient. I was thinking, well, what do we need to deal with ourselves to be able to receive the screams? It seems to me that we need to deal with our own wall-off places, our own screams. If we're not in that process ourselves, then we're not going to be able to hear the process, the screams, the machinery. If we're not our own machinery and our own screams, we're not going to be able to hear the others. You know, the Whitaker concept of therapy isn't going on with me as I'm doing therapy with you. There's no therapy at all. There's that resonant therapy.
If therapy isn't going on with me while I'm doing therapy with you, Doyle said there's no therapy going on at all. So both Ron and Doyle take us back to what do we have to deal with in those moments to be able to make the connection, to let this happen. John?
We have to be conscious of our own impulse to escape and enhance the walling off.
Our own impulse to escape out of that moment. Yeah. Thank you. The one patient I lost to suicide in about, I don't know, when did I get here? 83. Was a man who said, when I get drunk, I think of killing myself in the presence of my girlfriend. But I only have that fantasy when I'm intoxicated. But he never came to the session intoxicated. And it was all like, that's nothing. I don't know why I have that, it's nothing. And I believed him. I believed him. I just went right. We never stayed with it. And on my very birthday, I got the call that he did it just the way he imaged it. And so it was like what John just said, we have to watch our own tendency to not climb into the machinery where it's horrible. It was like, that changed my life. It was like, wherever the horror is, I'm going to be. That's what's calling me. That's where I have to stay. And it was like, to have to learn it that way was very bad. You want to take a minute just to think about it?
Okay, everybody look at me so that I'm relaxed and be able to get it right there.
Anybody else? What? Oh, you found it.
It was going off me. Quick. You said that there was a couple of ways, one way I heard, of your being aware of this disowned or insulated self, this repressed self.
Mm-hmm.
And that was to hear a phrase that resonated.
Especially bodily.
Empathetically resonated.
Yes. I did say that.
Yeah. When you said that, I thought of all kinds of ways that I have a relationship begin between those disowned selves and a person. What ways do you use, short of waiting for a 14-year-old to push yourself out of the way, to push the client out of the way, to be able to come out and speak to you? If I was doing voice dialogue, I'd be calling forth those personalities. I'd be asking them if they had anything to say. You were surprised or you were pleased that part came forward. What do you do to elicit the subpersonalities to dialogue?
I don't have to elicit them. They want to come forward. There's a pressure here. There's a pressure here. What I do is simply work empathetically and establish a close, good working relationship. what my experience is that this circle is such a powerful circle that this part says, at last, somebody might be there, because remember, this is walled off. There's a force that Freud showed. There's a force in what's repressed that wants to come back, the return of the repressed, he said it. So usually I'm just open for it and listening bodily, as I said, for those words or images or dreams or phrases, and then it's like I go there. I just say, then I just go there. Yes?
But your attitude.
The attitude.
Your attitude will enhance the possibility that a person will come through.
Exactly.
If you have a negative stance,
Right. That's what.
then you discourage the person from coming through. That's the point.
Exactly. And that attitude. Let me just close with a quote from a very interesting psychoanalyst in New York, Michael Eigen, about that attitude. What is crucial is how one relates to whatever one may be relating to. If, for example, one's emotional reality or truth is despair, what is most important is not that one may be in despair, but one's attitudes toward the despair. Through one's basic attentiveness, one's despair can declare itself and tell its story. One enters profound dialogue with it. So the attitude of the therapist that is really interested for the despair to tell its story, I think you're suggesting invites that presence forward. All right, so I think we've done it. Thank you very much.